It could just be that same sense of terror, that same frightening experience.
In my head.
Hey everybody, tonight we're going to talk about fireworks and fear of fireworks, how that relates to things like anxiety, phobia, PTSD. It's that time of year here in the United States. Independence Day is coming up today. Well, tonight is July 2nd, July 4th, which we call Independence Day, is right around the corner, so I figured let's talk about this. So, I don't know, there may be fireworks because of the date in the background of this video, so I apologize if there's anything triggering. If it's too triggering for you to even hear them, then you may want to turn this video off. But let's talk about it, because fireworks, when we have a fear of fireworks, what we're probably experiencing is an exaggerated startle response. And an exaggerated startle response, well, we all have a normal startle response, and it's in response to things that are frightening. And the two main fears that we inherently have, every single human being on this planet has a fear of loud sounds and a fear of falling. And so fireworks are obviously a loud sound, so it's normal to be startled by a firework if we don't expect it. If we suddenly hear a loud sound and our brain doesn't really know exactly what it is, it's normal to be startled. It's normal to jump back, for example. So your startle response happens in your body. You might jump back, you may wince, you may close down a little bit because you're protecting yourself, because it's something that is frightening. So that's normal, but you're probably experiencing an exaggerated startle response if you came here to this video. And an exaggerated startle response would be like that more intensely. Maybe you know that there's fireworks coming, or you know that they're going on, you know what it is, and yet you still kind of freak out over it. Or maybe instead of just like shrinking back, you jump up into the air, or your emotions like get really intense and rise up really fiercely. So what that is could be a number of different things. It could be related to anxiety, phobia, or to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So I'm going to start with PTSD, because PTSD kind of encompasses anxiety and phobia. So anxiety is just an irrational fear of something that's going to happen, or you perceive is going to happen. And when you hear a loud sound, you may perceive that you're threatened. And, you know, if you already have something like social anxiety, generalized anxiety, panic disorder, then hearing a loud sound may just give you that exaggerated startle response that you already would have had anyway, because your anxiety level is just naturally higher than most people, depending on the circumstance. A phobia is an irrational fear of a specific thing. So if you have a phobia of fireworks in particular, there's something about a firework that makes you afraid and makes you react this way towards it. And you may avoid fireworks, you may take extreme measures to try, like maybe if you know it's the 4th of July in America and you have the ability to, you may actually go to another country to avoid it. That would be an extreme measure to avoid, but it may not even be that complicated. It may be as simple as going down into your basement for the duration of this holiday, which is not a normal strategy for dealing with something like a firework. So that's how you know it's kind of exaggerated and it's inappropriate and it's a phobia. But PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, may encompass anxiety, it may encompass phobia, and you don't have to have a whole full-fledged disorder for any of these things to be happening. But post-traumatic stress disorder probably is most likely what's going on if you have a fear of fireworks. Now, let me get into this, because people hear post-traumatic stress disorder and they think, well, doesn't that mean you had to have gone to war? And that makes sense. You know, if a veteran came back from war and they hear a firework, it sounds like a mortar going off or a grenade or some kind of bomb. And that's frightening, that's scary, so we kind of get that intuitively, but PTSD is not limited to people who've gone to war, and so you may be somebody who's experiencing PTSD having never gone to war, and it may be related to fireworks, so I want to talk about that. So people don't understand, post-traumatic stress disorder does not have to be because you went to war. You can suffer from trauma from just about anything. You know, we also sometimes think of it as suffering from trauma through a car accident, but there are more ways to experience trauma than just that. Trauma is just when your life feels threatened, and your life can feel threatened for a number of different reasons, and an important reason that is not talked about enough is child abuse, because when we are children, we don't have the capability to defend our lives yet. We don't have the psychological resources, and we don't have the physical capability to defend our lives. If our parents neglected us, or if they abused us in some way, physically, emotionally, verbally, if they didn't provide the needs for us, if they didn't regard who we are as individuals, as people, instead of treating us like objects, then we could have suffered trauma. And especially because in childhood this is a repeated behavior, usually parenting is an ongoing thing, we could have experienced ongoing trauma, which some people would call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it can be very debilitating. You can also suffer trauma as a result of a surgery. You can suffer trauma from a breakup. You can suffer trauma from any experience where it feels like you are now left unable to be able to fend for yourself. So it's important to recognize that, usually if we see trauma occurring later in life from something like a breakup, then it's typically just a re-experiencing of an earlier childhood trauma, so that's something to consider. But we're talking about fireworks here, so what does this have to do with fireworks? Again, if you've experienced trauma and you have post-traumatic stress disorder, then you're going to be hyper-vigilant, which means you're going to be very aware of your environment, especially in times when you feel threatened. And if the fireworks threaten you in some way, if they feel scary, because they're an explosion, because they're a loud sound, it's natural and normal to be afraid of loud sounds, and you have this exaggerated startle response to them, then you're possibly experiencing PTSD symptoms. And in that moment when you're afraid from the firework, you may actually be having a flashback. And something else to understand is a flashback is not always just a picture or a memory in your head. It can also be a body sensation memory or an emotional memory. So you may hear an explosion and it may trigger something in your brain that reminds you of the time you were slammed up against the wall, because it's a similar sound and it's a similar feeling. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, you hear the firework and then all of a sudden you're picturing yourself being slammed up against the wall. It could just be that same sense of terror, that same frightening experience of where your life was threatened. And it could even be something like a gunshot, which is something I left out, which you don't have to experience in war. Again, you can experience that in your neighborhood depending on where you live in the world. So I think it's important to note that we may have experienced traumatic things, not realizing that they were traumatic, including childhood abuse, childhood neglect. When I say neglect, neglect doesn't have to be like not feeding you. Neglect could simply be not recognizing your desires and needs as a child and constantly deflecting away when you have a concern. If you are feeling sad and that was never recognized by your parents, or if you're feeling angry and you were always punished for being angry, then you weren't allowed to express yourself, and that can be very traumatizing, because the psychological message to you is that you don't exist and your needs don't matter. And that's kind of the equivalent of death. Not existing and death are kind of the same thing. So it's threatening and it's traumatic, and it may show up around the time when there are fireworks. Who would do this to Pikachu? So what can you do about all of this? For anxiety in general, what you can do is listen to yourself, listen to your body, and realize that it's over-exaggerating what's going on, and breathe. And you may have heard this many times before, but if you realize that your response is exaggerated and you can slow down your breathing, then you can slow down your heart rate in turn, and then you won't feel as panicked and you won't have those racing thoughts that sometimes come along with it. Now, if you're somebody who has panic disorder, breathing may be the wrong thing to do, so be aware of that. Use what feels right for you. It may also help to kind of rehearse the situation before any fireworks are going off. Like, I don't know, listen to loud sounds, maybe have somebody unexpectedly clap behind you, somebody that you trust, so that you can kind of desensitize yourself to it a little bit. And that may be something you'll need to do with a therapist. Anything that I've been talking about here, anxiety, phobias, PTSD. It may not be something that you can figure out on your own, whether or not that's what's going on, so you'll want to seek a licensed professional, a therapist, to be able to diagnose that. That's something that I can't do, obviously. But there are ways to calm yourself, such as breathing slowly, desensitizing yourself. And I have many videos here on the channel also about these topics if you want to research them. So if you're new here, please subscribe. I do mental health videos Monday through Friday, skip a day here and there sometimes, but I do have a lot of videos on these topics of trauma and anxiety and all these kinds of different things. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications every time I do a video. If you'd like to support this channel, I have a Patreon page. You can head on over there and send a small amount my way and get some extra behind the scenes stuff. And finally, I would love to hear from you, and I'm sure the community would like to hear from you as well. If you have had trouble with being afraid of fireworks, what have you done to be able to manage it? Hopefully it wasn't something that avoided them altogether, because that's not a healthy coping strategy, but I'd love to hear from you. Anything that has helped, let me know and let us know down in the comments below. And thank you for being here with us tonight.